I've had an order in from a website for a board that's currently out of stock, an end grain chopping board in walnut. The customer's seen an image of one on my website that he really likes, and he'd like me to make one in that style for him. And the style he likes, as per the picture, is a bit like book matching the grain. So I've dragged these two pieces out from my wood store down at the very far end of my workshop. And this piece I think could be particularly interesting. There's a lovely bit of colour variation there and this really nice grain patterns. The board's going to be one of my standard sizes, 400 by 300. If you want to know how to size stock for a size of board that you want to make, I've made a video on that and I'll put a link down below and up in the card above. So I'm going to cut two pieces off of this plank and then I'm going to run them through the planer and have a look and see what we got. So here are the two pieces that I've just cleaned up, and I've also cleaned up the two ends as well so we can see the end grain. And if you look here, this colour differentiation will look absolutely superb. If I turn them around, then we can see this piece is far more dramatic. That's going to look gorgeous. And if you can imagine what it's going to look when it's book matched, absolutely beautiful. However, these two pieces together will be too big for the board, and it will also, I feel, make the board maybe a little bit too busy. Too much of a good thing isn't a good thing anymore, is it? So if I pop that piece out the way and grab another piece that I found in the wood store, much less dramatic on the end grain. So if I keep this piece pretty much the size it is, I might trim back to here somewhere just so that this bit isn't too big. Then I'm going to show this pattern throughout the board, book matched, diminishing as it goes down to the other end, and then I can use this as a plainer grain pattern around it, top and bottom, to make this stand out. So I'm going to rip them down to rough size on the bandsaw first, and then I'll cut them to the exact size I want on the table saw. So let's see what we've given ourselves to work with then. We've got this beautiful main pattern here, and that gives me a little, I think I'm going to go with that. I quite like that. So this is going to make its own pattern at the end of this, as are these two pieces. But this is obviously the main star of the show. So let's get that glued up into a blank. I learned a little too late for these clamps the simple trick of putting some masking tape on top of the clamp will save it from getting all that horrible glue all over it. But at least they won't get any worse. So just a quick dry clamp to make sure everything closes up nicely. One down on the top to make sure nothing kinks up out the way. I know some like to leave the glue until it sort of semi-sets before they wipe it off, but I always forget, so I like to do it now. Now I'll wait for the glue to set, but you won't have to. Seconds for you, but 24 hours for me. My arm's aching. So I'll plane the first side flat on the planer. Then with that side down, I can run it through the thicknesser to get the other side flat and parallel. So I start by cutting one end square, Now my target thickness for the board is 40 mil, and I've got 457 mil to play with. So if I mark 45 mil and set my blade to the outside of that, that'll leave me with a nads over 42 mil, 2 mil to play with to make sure everything comes out flat and smooth. Well, I don't know about you, but I think that's just glorious. I think that's truly beautiful. I just thought I'd try moving the pattern pieces around a little bit to see if I could come up with something a little better. I was wondering what it would look like with this main piece, the star of the show, right in the middle. So I think I'm going to go with it that way. So that's centerpiece, center board, if you like, slightly smaller, slightly smaller, slightly smaller, slightly smaller. I think that looks great. Once again, a dry clamp just to make sure everything goes together nice. Nice and gently, because I don't want everything schmuzzing around. So I've popped the board out the clamps and knocked off the glue snots, and now I'm ready to flatten it. So my approach to flatten it is to use the roundover bit of the palm router, put a little roundover on the back edge, and then run it across the surface planer, taking really fine passes off, and that works really well for me. I don't get a blowout, and it's a really quick process. Now, to flatten the top of the board, I take a couple of different approaches depending on how well the board's come out of the glue up. This one's come out particularly well, so I'll run it through the drum sander. If it's not come out that well, then I'll run it through the thicknesser, taking exactly the same approach. I'll put a little roundover across the top and take very light passes so I don't get any blowout, and again, works really well for me. I have a couple of different approaches to true up or flatten the edges of the board. If I've done a really bad job on the glue up, then I might use the table saw, but if I've done a really good job on the glue up, as I have for this one, I'll use the belt sander. To sand the board, I always start with 80 grit, then I move up to 120, then 180. Then after the handles and the roundovers, I'll damp the board and then finish it off again with another 180 all over. I think I've tried every approach possible when it comes to cutting the handles on the boards. At the moment I'm favouring the spindle moulder. It leaves a beautiful finish and is by far the quickest, excluding the setup time. So with the handles cut in the bottom of the board, I can move on to round over the corners. And for that, I've got an extra large roundover bit, bearing guided roundover bit set up in my router. And I've got this extended plate on the base plate on the router that I made with some 6mm acrylic. That extra bit of base plate allows me greater stability, balancing on the edge of the board. And then I just use a pivot motion so I keep the weight centered on the edge. And finally 3.2mm round over to get rid of that last sharp edge. And now I'll go over the entire board with 180 grit. Then I'll give it a good damping to swell the grain. And once that's dry, I'll go over it again with 180. Then the penultimate job, a little spell in the oil bath for a few minutes. Look at that. And I'll leave it to dry overnight. Well, now the oil's dry, I can apply the beeswax and oil. I use a 30% mixture, which I make up myself, to 30% beeswax by volume to oil, and I warm it up in one of my wife's favourite saucepans until the beeswax is completely dissolved, and then leave it cool. And it seals the board and also gives it that beautiful sheen. And the final job before it goes in the box for the customer is to fit some rubber feet and put my little brand plank on. So I measure in 30mm. From each corner, and the only reason I'm using a drill and countersink is it's got the right size bit in it that I want. I use stainless steel screws and washers so they're not going to rust when the board gets popped in the washing up bowl. And that's it, my board's finished, ready to get packaged up and sent to the customer. I'm really pleased with the way that's come out. I love the grain pattern, I think it's beautiful. As I mentioned in the video, cutting the handles on the spindle moulder at the moment is my favourite approach. I think they come out beautifully, and apart from the setup time, it's really, really quick. So I hope you've enjoyed the video, and that if you decide to make a board in this style, it'll be of some help to you. And if you have, and it does, then give us a thumbs up, and why not consider subscribing to the channel to see what else I get up to in the workshop. Thanks very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Ta-ra.